Marshall, thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
So, for those that don't know, Marshall Mosher is CEO of Vestigo. In the brawlosphere, he was in the very first event in 2012, and he was in the very last event in 2018 at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So you've officially bookended the brawl for what we've done today.
I missed it too much. It was 4 years and I had to come back and get back in the ring.
Get punched again.
Exactly, right, yeah.
It gets a little addicting.
Right, it does.
Well, we'll dig into that story, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're into right now?
Yeah, for sure. Well, like you said, Vestigo is definitely what consumes most of my time right now. For anyone who hasn't heard of Vestigo, you know it quite well, but it's a company that uses all kinds of amazing experiences to build team mindsets. And what I mean by that is challenging a team to be able to adapt to a changing environment with the mindset of getting outside your comfort zone and being able to stay comfortable in an unfamiliar and new experience. So we'll use rappelling, whitewater kayaking, caving, even just hiking up a mountain to get companies and their teams to develop that mindset, which is interesting in the sense that that mindset is the most important factor for innovation and creativity. So for a lot of companies out there that are worried about being disrupted, about not moving fast enough, building that mindset in their team is one of the most important things they can do. And by the way, it also happens to build stronger relationships and bonds, and it's a lot more fun than a happy hour or a Braves game. So a bit of a unique approach, but that's the model that we've been pioneering for the past 2 years, and it's what takes up most of my time. But in my free time, I also love doing all kinds of personal adventures, any kind of action adventure sport, you name it. I like to at least learn how to do it and see how you experience the world through that lens.
Sweet. Well, the team building makes a ton of sense. Doing scary stuff together, doing shared hardship.
Exactly.
I get how that bonds you together.
It's very similar in terms of mindset to how a brawler goes through the hero's journey, kind of in your own terms, from starting to finish. And the person you are on the other side is not the person you started with. And it's a pretty powerful impact for that brawler and that person. We try to do that on a big macro scale for teams. It's probably a little bit less impactful than getting punched in the face in the brawl, but
pun intended.
That's right.
Yeah, all right. So you talk about getting outside your comfort zone, that kind of being the vein that you're swimming in to create this change and to create this team building. On a personal level, like mentally, what does that do? Because you've done that a lot, right? You've pushed your boundaries again and again and again to not just, I guess, build this programming for using adventure as this way to create company culture and change and team building. What does it do for you personally? Why do you like getting outside your comfort zone?
Yeah, it's a really good question. If anyone listening has ever traveled to a new country before or gone and done an experience they've never done before, I think everyone will resonate with that feeling you get when you step off the plane in some country that no one's speaking English and the food's different, the culture's different, and you have this kind of initial reaction of maybe thinking like, oh crap, I might be in a little bit over my head. I don't know how I'm gonna get around. I don't know what I'm gonna eat, things like that. And you work through that experience and come out with a bigger lens of what the world is like and how you can navigate yourself through it. So from an adventure standpoint, it's exactly the same concept. Every time you whitewater kayak down a new river or a new rapid, or snowboard down a new run that's harder than what you've done before, you see a little bit more about what your own potential is. And that potential goes far more than just traveling the world or experiencing a new natural environment. It's all about what you mentally can do as well. And the barriers of what your potential is keep getting bigger and bigger with each challenge that you bring upon yourself. So I love, like yourself, I love making metaphors between the physical and the mental world. And there's so many ways that those connect together. So for me, every time I challenge myself, push myself a little bit further, which is why I love learning new sports and challenging myself, because it's learning that whole process all over again. It helps me to understand a little bit more about who I am and what I can do.
And through the lens of the hero's journey, which you brought up, which I love, those challenges are little trials.
Exactly.
And the more trials that you overcome, the more you realize, hey, maybe I am a hero. Maybe I can, actually affect this world around me, and it builds up some momentum. So
exactly, and everything is relative to our own experiences. When we're first starting to adopt that mindset, something very small that looks small to us now, that might have looked huge to us back then, is now way more manageable than it was before. So everything kind of builds upon itself.
So you run an adventure company. What's the craziest adventure you've ever been on?
That's a good question. So there's so many different types of stories in terms of craziest. We both went to the University of Georgia. You could say there have been some crazy football games or nights downtown, but in terms of adventures, specifically with outdoor recreation, it's interesting to hear what people say, because we actually ask this question as a kind of an icebreaker when we first start an experience. Say, go around the circle, say your name, where you're from, and what's the trailer 30-second version of your favorite adventure story. And the stories we'll hear oftentimes are the stories where people got in a situation they didn't want to be in, and maybe they almost died, or they think they almost died, and obviously they didn't, and now they're saying that is the favorite story in terms of adventure they've ever had. So for me personally, there strangely hasn't actually been a time when I really thought, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of this.
That's surprising.
Which I know. I'm sure my girlfriend would be happy to hear me say that. But I haven't had that one moment when I was like, well, it's been a fun life. This is it. But every time I get worked in a hole whitewater kayaking, which if anyone doesn't whitewater kayak, a hole is when water flows over a rock in a river and then straight down and then recirculates. So the elevation of the water here is actually lower than the water over here. So it's actually a physical indentation below the river. And if you get trapped in it, you just kept recirculated up and down. And it's like being dunked underwater a bunch of times.
For those that aren't watching, Marshall is basically making a washing machine motion with his hands. So
Right.
you basically get caught in a spin cycle in a river.
Exactly.
That sounds like
Right.
a good way to drown.
It could be if you get trapped in a really bad one, and there haven't been anything terrible, but every time you just get worked in one and you're going, cartwheels over with this underwater environment, you're back up and back down. After about 30 seconds, if you're still in it, you start to have those kinds of thoughts. And it's nothing terrible, like you're going to get out. But in that moment, you feel like, well, what happens if I don't? And those, I think, are the moments when we really can turn a second into a lifetime of evaluating where we are in our life, where we want to go, what we've done, what we haven't done. And you can get a little bit more clarity on some things that are generally pretty hard to get clarity on. So I know that's not a specific story that you're probably looking for.
Is there a river? Is there a specific rapid, like a 5, class 5 or something, where that made you think of that moment to say right now? Like,
there's a bunch of small spots that I've been in that have done that. Nothing really large in particular. Like, for instance, Matt Nielsen, one of my teammates at Vestigo, he's got an amazing story of how he got trapped in what's called a sieve, which is essentially an underwater cave where the water flows, it hits a rock and then goes under it. And if you're at that spot, you also hit the rock and go under it, but you might get trapped under the rock. And he actually got in one of those situations, almost drowned, was able to get out, and had a really life-changing experience of reevaluating what he wanted to do with his life. His story is a lot better than mine because I don't have one of those. But every little micro version of that I experience really helps me a lot to reevaluate kind of what I'm doing, whether I'm on the path that I want to be on, and what are the things that are really the most important.
That's awesome. Well, recently I saw you were playing superhero in a certain suit. Can you tell me about that? What's going on with that?
For sure, yeah. So I think this is totally a story in just following your passions and the things that are really exciting to you. And when an opportunity that's really exciting comes up, you just chase it and make it work. So I've always loved any intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, and adventure. And whatever combines those three things is something that I'm all about for sure, which is why I love Vestigo so much, because it absolutely does. But another thing came up where I got put in touch with a guy here in the US who's now a really good friend, who is bringing the gravity jet suit to the United States. Which, if anyone hasn't seen or heard of gravity...
Probably most people. Explain gravity.
Well, it's actually, I wouldn't be surprised, it's been a bit of a social media phenomenon now, where it's essentially, people are calling it the real-life Iron Man suit. Gravity would never refer to it that way, but it looks essentially almost like Iron Man flying, where you have two jet engines on your arms, and then one big one on your back, and you can control where you go based off of the motions of your body. So it uses the biomechanics that we're born with as humans to control three-dimensional space, which there hasn't been any type of aviation device that's done that before. Of course, people think of the jetpack, the one that was in the 1960s Olympics, where a guy flies in on a typical Jetsons style jetpack, where it's just this backpack of jets on your back and you control it with little throttles on your arm. That's not the case with this. It's engines that are actually on your arm and then one on your back that form a tripod of thrust that you can control whether you go up, down, left, or right by moving and flaring your arms closer together or further apart, and then left and right. So you really do feel like you're augmenting your own human body with technology to be able to fly around like Iron Man, which sounds cool probably for someone listening to this podcast, but just as soon as you finish this podcast, not right now because you want to listen to the rest, but right afterwards, go to gravity.co, check this out, watch a video, you'll be amazed, just like I was. So I started talking to one of the guys that was working on the US team to bring this to the US because they're based out of the UK in London, right outside London. And at that time, the main focus of the company was on using the suit to do flight demonstrations at conferences, giving a keynote speech, and talking about the odds that Richard Brown and the founder had to overcome to build something that everyone said was impossible. Right around that time when I got put in touch with them, they were considering, how do we start using the suit for more than just flight demos? How can we potentially get people in the suit and train people who aren't pilots to learn how to fly a jet suit? So using the background of an outdoor adventure company that uses all kinds of adventure sports for personal growth and company growth, I was able to use that background to start helping Gravity pioneer this, what's called jet suit flight experience that we're now bringing to Atlanta in the beginning of May. So now for the first time, people can actually put the suit on, learn how to do it. Of course, in a safe environment, you're attached to a tether system. Think of a small crane with a climbing rope coming down from it and a belayer on the other side. That's literally what it is.
Blast off the moon.
So you can't just fly up, right? We can actually set the power of the suit, so we can trim that down if we want. And we do have a kill switch. If someone is just blasting off a little bit too much, just press the button, brake on the belayer, you're good to go. So a lot of safety involved. You don't have to have a ton of fitness. You don't have to be a gymnast, but it does take a decent amount of coordination and control that way. But now people can actually experience what it's like to fly in the suit, and I'm pretty excited for seeing how that goes.
It's amazing. How can people, get involved with that May event? Where if people want to fly in a jet suit, the only way they can fly in a jet suit is if they go to iTunes, give a 5-star rating to this podcast, leave a great review, and then Matt will put them in touch with me. You're my favorite.
Gotcha. And then I'll maybe consider it.
Okay. Love it. Cool. So, it obviously requires a bunch of courage to do something like this too. You have jets on your arms, you have jets on your back. You could blast off into space. You couldn't, but it reinforces a common theme with you, which is getting outside your comfort zone or pushing the limits of fear in order to experience more of life or learn more about yourself or whatever reason you're doing it for. And to circle it back to Brawl for a Cause here, that's central to what we do.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears. Let's talk about 2012 and our very first Bulldog Brawl at University of Georgia when you stepped in the ring. Tell me what you remember from that experience.
I got beat up so bad I just blacked out the whole day. No, I'm just kidding. Partially, maybe. So I had never done anything like boxing before. And it's interesting because you just said it so well, how the brawl and the things you experience in the brawl correlates so well with everything else I've been talking about. So you would think that, oh, well, this guy coming from this adventure background, he could jump into this and do it no problem. That's really not the case. Just like, as you know, all the other brawlers, you go through this mental challenge of this fear of stepping in the ring to see what you can do in a sport you've never done before, where you're literally taking punches to the face for it. So that was a very intimidating experience, even with the background that I had. Fortunately, I did have a wrestling background, which I thought would help because it's also one-on-one in a kind of a combative environment. Of course, there's no punching or things like that. But the one thing that did translate really well from wrestling was stamina. And I think I forgot about that 4 years later. But in that very first fight, stamina, I think, was what ultimately allowed me to come out on top and win the match, because in the third round, it came down to who's more in shape.
So let's pause there. So the guy you're against, a guy named Justin Bradley, he was he was on the baseball club team for University of Georgia, great athlete, and had been training boxing a little bit longer than you.
Yeah.
And going in, I considered him to kind of have an advantage just because of the additional boxing training. But what I overlooked and what you taught me was that wrestling stamina, the going, as hard as you could for 3 equal rounds, because Justin lost steam. And forgive me, it has a happy ending, but the first 2 rounds, he took you to town, man.
He did.
There were some big shots. I was like, oh no, my friend Marshall's getting beat up.
It was bad.
And there are a lot of pictures from that first event Blaine Marable took. And there's one where he literally punched you through a rope, and it's right in front of me. I'm like, oh no. And
I almost fell out. He almost punched me out of the ring.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. There's a picture of that moment, which is awesome. We'll try to share that.
Yeah. Well, there's YouTube videos still of it, so you can watch it.
Yeah, it's on YouTube too. So I remember that moment. I was just like, oh man. And then it's beautiful because it sets up this third round where you just go on a roll. He's exhausted. He can't defend himself. You land double-digit punches in a row against him, and the refs have to call it. So you get that third round TKO. What was that like, going from man, I'm having my ass handed to me, to I just won? That transformation.
It was a really interesting and insightful experience for me, actually, because I'm generally just a really kind of happy, nice guy. It's really hard to piss me off, so, as you probably know. So it took 2 rounds of me getting the shit kicked out of me to really piss me off and get into real boxing mode. And I think it was a combination of going into that third round, just being I'm not taking another round of a beating like that, as well as keeping the stamina at 100% the whole time. That I think that was the combination of the 2 things, with also the factor of Justin losing a little bit of stamina, just like everyone does going into the third period, and probably also thinking all right, I got this guy in the first 2 rounds. There's probably not that much I have to do. Just take it easy in this one. I haven't talked to him about that. I don't know, but I would have that thought going through my head, so I'm assuming he might have. And all those factors just played together in that sense. But it was a really insightful experience for me, because I learned a lot of those things along the way, as well as the power of persistence and never letting that power level drop below 100%. It's going hard the whole time.
It's an inspirational moment. I mean, for people listening, you might be losing the first round in the ring or in life. Don't give up. You could have your Marshall Mosher moment in the third round and get that TKO.
Especially in life, there's no third round.
Yeah.
Unless you do something that kills you, I guess. But there's always another round that you can get back in and change the game, for sure, no matter how the other ones are.
And so that first event was a little different than what we do now. So we had basically a big, fraternity or student organization fight night. And it was all benefiting one organization, UGA Heroes. Our goal is to raise $12,000, representative of $1 for each child affected by HIV/AIDS in Georgia. So everyone's kind of rallied around one cause. And what's beautiful about you and your involvement in Brawl for a Cause is you were there at the beginning, kind of at our impetus, our spark, and then you were there for our biggest and best event, in our history, in Brawl the Bend, which is a very different model. So now people sign up for the charity that they personally believe in. They fight and rally their community to support this change that they want to see in the world. And so, can you tell me a little bit about the difference of signing up to fight in that college event and maybe why you did it then, and then what you fought for in the last event, and how that changed your mindset or your perspective on what you were doing and why?
Yeah, for sure. Gosh, thinking back to that very first event, I think I signed up because the student government administration totally threw me under the bus, and they're like, we have to have someone that represents us, and you wrestled, right? Cool, you'll go boxing. I was like, boxing and wrestling are completely different. But of course, I was like, I'm not going to turn down a new challenge. This is totally in line with everything that I like to do, in taking on a new sport and a new environment that I've never done before, kind of getting back to that being comfortable, getting outside your comfort zone type thing I was talking about earlier. So I said, sure, yeah, let's go. And there was actually, I think, a few other people. So Anush Vinod, one of my friends from UGA, that was also an SGA, he also actually fought in as well. So we had a couple people, and it was structured based on organization, right, back at that time?
Yeah, and you two won a executive ticket together.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yeah,
your
so
VP, Anush, was the treasurer.
He was our treasurer. Yeah, nice. So we were very close.
Teaming up.
I think it was that after that or
the
before?
Next year,
Yeah, so it took getting in the ring and fighting for something like this to build a bond for us to.
There we go.
So that was exactly why we right. Exactly. So it was mainly back then. It was because it was something that I wanted to try. There was a new experience, but also because there was this factor of supporting a group of friends that I cared about and wanting to do this thing that would contribute to a greater cause. And a lot of my good friends were in UGA Heroes at the time. It was an amazing organization that did so many incredible things, and it was amazing to hear the story. So I was really inspired by how one of our mutual friends, Garrett, who started Heroes, actually started this thing from nothing and grew it to one of the largest, if not the largest organization on campus at UGA. And that was before I got into the whole entrepreneurship scene, but I was still really fascinated by those stories. So I wanted to be a part of that hero story. I wanted to help support SGA. I wanted to do this new challenge. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into outside of those three things, but it was an amazing experience. And I'm so glad I did it, especially when I can compare it to, was it 4 years later, 5 years later for the most recent one?
Yeah,
might have been more than
2018, 6 years later.
6 years later, wow. Time goes by fast.
6-year lapse between your two bouts.
Yeah, wow. I should have kept up the training for those 6 years. But to be able to compare, to be able to see the progress between that very first event and the very last Brawl for a Cause really reminds me of that story of Heroes that I was so fascinated with, of how you take something from, this is the first time we've ever done this, no one has any idea what we're doing, you did a great job, but I'm sure everything going through your head was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Probably.
Fires everywhere.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah. To what happened last year where there's still fires, not ones that you could have controlled, but just to be able to see how you handled those and managed those in such an amazing, inspiring way, and took this thing from that first experience to field of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It was inspirational for me, so it was amazing to be a part of it.
Well, the only way that's possible is people like you and people willing to sign up and fight for what they believe in. So what did you fight for at Brawl the Bend? What was your cause? Yeah,
well, I think that's one of the most amazing parts of the entire Brawl, was the sense that there really are no losers. Everyone who gets in the ring is fighting for a cause they believe in, and because it's a bigger picture than just who wins or loses, every single person who's there is putting their body, their selves on the line for that cause, which is amazing. So for me, I had done a initiative about a year, maybe a year or two earlier, that was really impactful for me, where I was helping to lead and coordinate an experience for a friend, Cardin Wyckoff, who I got to know at UGA really well through working at the UGA Disabilities Resource Center. Cardin has muscular dystrophy, and for anyone who doesn't know, that's a degenerative muscular disease where your muscles work and break down like normal, but they don't recover like normal. So imagine every time you go to the gym, you're breaking down those muscle fibers in order to get stronger and build them up, but they don't get stronger because they don't build back. So very limited mobility, and Cardin has been an amazing advocate both at UGA and beyond for disability accessibility awareness. Every time, we don't realize it because we're walking, but every time you are going down a sidewalk in a wheelchair and the sidewalk ends and there's no way to get down to the street because no one thought to build a little ramp, that's a big deal for Cardin. It's something we overlook every day. So I wanted to do something that could use the resources that I had at Vestigo to help further the mission that Cardin and her brother were doing, which was to raise awareness for muscular dystrophy and just disability awareness in general. So her brother, which he's even bigger and taller and stronger than me, would run Spartan races with Cardin on his back to raise awareness for muscular dystrophy.
Amazing.
And started doing this in an incredible campaign that ultimately got him and Cardin on American Ninja Warrior to further use that as a platform to raise awareness for muscular dystrophy. So I had been following their stories, saw that. It was amazing. Loved American Ninja Warrior, and it was awesome to see him go through that experience. But then afterwards, I asked him, hey, what's next? What's the next thing you're going to do to take this and bring it to an even bigger scale in terms of the impact that's going to have and the awareness it's going to raise? And the answer was, well, we don't know. We need to work on that and figure it out. So I wanted to use the resources of Vestigo to further that, and we came up with this idea to carry Cardin across the entire Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail, which is 78 miles, I think over 20 or 30,000 feet of elevation gain throughout the course of 9 different days. And it's amazing because we had a group of anywhere from 10 to 30 people come out each day to actually help carry Cardin through that distance. And it could have been someone who carried her 10 feet or 1,000 feet. Everyone played whatever part they could play, and a new group would come every day. Because we structured it from road crossing to road crossing, so we'd always camp at a way that was accessible for someone to drive in. So a new group could come every day and participate. And Spencer, her brother, worked at Home Depot at the time, so we actually used it as a type of leadership development, team building experience for Home Depot to actually come out and have X amount of people per day help in this amazing initiative. And that was the first time that Vestigo actually started to pivot into this team experiential type adventure program that we hadn't done before, that we've now focused entirely 100% on. So it was an amazing initiative, one of the most impactful things I've ever done, because you're walking up a hill with essentially the weight of 2 heavy backpacker bags. But it's not like you're just carrying a backpack. You're carrying an amazing human being who is struggling just as hard as you're struggling and whispering in your ear, you got this, encouragement the entire way, which created an amazing experience for every single person who participated in that. So I wanted to get in the ring to fight for continuing that awareness, continuing that mission we had initially started with, and raising money for what hopefully will be round 2 of that initial AT hike. And there's a couple ideas out there. We're trying to go bigger, go better, but the current one is carrying Cardin up Mount Kilimanjaro.
So powerful. Okay, well, you gotta let me know when the Kilimanjaro trip is. That would be awesome to be a part of.
Absolutely, we'd love to have you out there. A lot of it is because now all of us are working jobs that are taking a ton of time. So it really depends on when we can get Spencer and Carden and me and everyone together aligned. But the planning is still going forward, and we're really excited for it.
Maybe something to do with the exchange.
I was thinking about that.
Were
actually.
You? Okay.
So potentially.
So for those that don't know, the exchange is a men's group started by some friends of ours that it's really a safe space to be vulnerable, grow together. A lot of great speakers, a lot of great experiences, a lot of them facilitated by you and Vestigo. Can you talk about some of the other experiences that maybe you've done with the exchange or with Vestigo that are available, that are out there?
For sure, yeah. The best kinds of experiences that we've done for the exchange and that we do for a lot of other companies are ones that are physically very accessible but mentally very challenging. And what I mean by that is something like rappelling. If anyone doesn't know what rappelling is, it's a very similar setup to climbing, except you start at the top and you go down instead of starting at the bottom and going up. So what that does is you start at the edge of the cliff, you walk to the edge, and you have a device hooked onto you and the rope that you control your descent down the cliff. But it forces you, as soon as you step out over the edge, to face that fear of heights. And fear of heights is one of the most prolific fears in the United States, at least. It's actually only number 2 to public speaking. So I guess this is actually more terrifying to most people.
Number 1?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It is.
I'm way more scared of heights.
I know. Yeah, it's amazing. But so the fear of heights is actually number 2. And almost everyone has it to some degree. Even I still get scared of heights in new situations. So what it does is it helps people to get in that mental environment that I was talking about when you're challenging yourself through any kind of new experience, and start having those thoughts go through your head of, what happens if this rope breaks? What happens if I fall? What happens if I die? What's important to me? What have I not done that I've wanted to do? And just, you can't even help it, but these thoughts just start rolling through your head and until you get to the bottom. And of course, it's combined with a bunch of thoughts of, I don't know if I can do this. No, I can do this. Back and forth kind of mindset. But physically, it's not hard at all. You're going with gravity. It's very physically easy, but mentally it's extremely challenging. So things like that work really well in the sense that we can get anyone at a company, I mean literally anyone, to be able to rappel, experience this, and go through that hero's journey in a small 5-minute window. And come out on the bottom with a different mindset than they started with on the top. So things that combine that easy physically, difficult mentally type program together are the easiest for us to do because it's accessible to literally anyone in the company.
So I'd like to interject right there. So last year, really powerful experience that we had together. I was working late night on our last event at Brawl calls it Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and like stressed out. It was dark. I hadn't eaten all day. I'd just gotten Chipotle. I was walking back into Atlanta Tech Village, and there you were, sitting there. I think we might have been like the only 2 at ATV.
I think so, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, Marshall, what's up, man? Like, what are you doing here? And you're like, just wrapping up a few emails. I'm about to go rappelling. I'm like, what? It's like 9 o'clock at night. What do you mean you're about to go rappelling? It's pitch black. It's like, yeah, night rappelling. Like, you want to come? Like, what? So, long story short, you talked me into this. We go 20 minutes away from Atlanta, really close,
super close,
and go to this amazing state park, right by a waterfall. There's this spot where I guess you take a lot of people to
up in Roswell.
Yeah, and so we walk along, and you don't even have that much equipment with you. You throw like a rope over your back.
I just got the parachute and pushed off the cliff.
But we walk by the spooky house, and then down to this spot. You tie a rope around a tree. You put is it carabiner? What's the thing called?
You use some carabiners, and it's called an ATC. It's what controls your descent.
Yeah. Okay. So you strap on the ATC, and you're just like, okay, walk backwards towards the edge, and just kind of roll back over. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, no way. I'm gonna fall into this waterfall. There's no chance I'm doing that. But it was that like positive self-talk that hey, Marshall wouldn't lead me astray. So there was trust in you, and there was, other people do this. I can do this too, and I'm gonna be okay. And it's only impossible until it's done. Like I can do this.
Did you go through some of those same thoughts that I was talking about? And what was that? What was going through your head?
Totally. That inner talk is so important to me. When you do scary stuff, you can either talk yourself out of something or you can talk yourself into something.
Yeah.
And sometimes, fear's there for a reason. It's there to protect you. Fear of heights makes sense, right? You don't want to fall to your death.
Exactly.
But when it makes sense to, building up that muscle memory of overcoming that little trial, that little obstacle, that's really just expanding your comfort zone a little bit.
Exactly.
So that moment, I was getting outside my comfort zone, leaning back to start, letting out a little bit more slack in that rope and descending down that rappelling track.
And did it make it easier that you couldn't see anything because it was dark, or was that scarier?
The darkness, I think it added to the overall experience just because it was like, not only am I doing this scary thing, I'm doing it where I can't see anything around me. And it wasn't like pitch black, so I could still see, like, that's a long way to fall. But, there's no one around. There's no one else in that park. Like, it was all around. It was a great way to face a fear in a very, like you said, in a very, like, micro way, but from a time input standpoint and from a physical demand standpoint. Like, all you really need, you can do it one-armed.
Exactly.
Let it out.
It's not very physically difficult. And the really fascinating thing about a fear of heights is that it's actually not a fear of heights. It's something that's a little bit deeper, a little bit more basic. So no one looks at a picture of Mount Everest and starts getting scared, unless maybe they're about to go climb it, then maybe.
Okay.
But so it's not a fear of tall things, it's a fear of falling. But a fear of falling isn't really a fear of falling if you break it down into what the most basic kind of emotion, the most basic fear that this might be is. It's actually something else. It's a fear of not being in control. Because when you're falling, you don't have any control of the outcome, ultimately the splat that you would have at the bottom. But when you think of it as a fear of not being in control, it relates to so many other things outside of rappelling. And even when you step in the ring, you can't control what that other person is going to do, but you can control what you do. And in rappelling, you are falling, but you're falling in a controlled way because you can control how fast or slow you go based on the rope system that you use and that ATC that controls your descent. So it's very similar to getting in the ring in the sense that you might not be able to control the situation that you're in, the fact that you're falling, but you can control what you do. And what you do ultimately determines the outcome of this unknown, unforeseen situation.
Love how you look at that. That's awesome. So in those moments, because surely they happen to you too, in those moments where you're facing a new fear, you're pushing yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone, what are you saying to yourself? What are those what's that inner dialogue like in your head when you're like, all right, I'm going to strap on this jet suit and fly around a little bit, or I'm going to kite surf or paraglide or all the things that you do. But which, by the way, like, you should totally go check out Marshall on Instagram. We'll share that and everything. But, like, you do some crazy shit. It's awesome. It's really entertaining to follow.
You got to come join me on some of that stuff.
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah. I actually just had a conversation last week. So we were doing a demo out in LA for a couple people that could be really key potential partners to work with. And one of the guys that came out is one of the ones in the US that's going to be helping us with kind of US operations for Gravity here in the States. And I actually asked him this exact same question, and he's way cooler than me. So I'll tell everyone his answer. He's the commander of the test pilot program for the Air Force, where any new aircraft that's built, and I'm talking about state-of-the-art fighter jets, the most advanced aircrafts in the world, someone has to fly them first. And that's what a test pilot does, is you get in a situation that no one has ever been in because no one's flown this plane because it was just invented. And he's the kind of the commander of that test pilot program. So he has done a ton of test piloting himself, of being the first person to get in a very new aircraft and experience that with little to no training. So I think for the typical fighter jet, you go through months and months of training. For a test pilot, you go through, I think, either an afternoon or a day of kind of learning things, maybe one simulator, and then you're in the plane. instead of the months that a normal person would go through. So I asked him, what do you do when you get in a new situation where the stakes are very high, that no one has ever been in and that you've never been in? What do you do to standardize that process? And the number one thing that I actually really related to that he said was you don't let your emotions get in the way. You always keep kind of a logical head on, but you always follow a checklist of the things that are going to keep you safe and make you successful. So for instance, I'm just now learning how to paraglide because I love aviation, but aviation is expensive. But paragliding is a really affordable, easy way to get up in the sky in a free flight way. There's no motors. You launch your wing off the top of a cliff. It's not like base jumping where you just jump off and you pull your parachute, but you lay the parachute on the ground, the wing on the ground, you pull it up with a gust of wind, and then it's above you flying as a wing, and then you nice and easily kind of hop off the edge of the cliff, and then you're flying. You can catch thermals, go off an elevation, fly for long distances, even without a motor. And one of the things that I'm learning in that is before you go, you always follow a procedure of steps. So first you lay your wing out on the ground, then you raise each of the lines to make sure the lines aren't twisted or they're not caught on a snag or on a branch or something that's on the ground you didn't see. And then when you put your harness on, you check to make sure that your reserve hasn't broken, or that you can still see the pins in it and that it hasn't come apart at all. And all these safety things that you do before you ever actually get in the sky. And just like the advice I was getting from the fighter pilot to say you follow this exact same procedure regardless of what the aircraft is. So whenever I do something new, whenever I get a new environment, even if it's a completely new sport, I try to follow a mental checklist of what am I going to do if this happens, and think through all the scenarios of what could happen. Because if you consciously think through that before you actually get in that experience, when that happens, you're not going to be surprised or caught off guard because you don't know what to do.
So you fall back on this mental checklist of all the things to keep you safe, and in doing so, occupy your mind to keep it away from potential emotional outbursts of freaking out. And instead, just kind of go through all the things that are productive and help keep you safe.
Exactly. Yeah, you really operationalize it and it's just like with boxing, when you get in the ring and you're fighting someone and someone does a particular type of punch or steps in a certain way, there's ways you can react to that environment, that situation, in a particular calculated way that has previously been thought out before you actually step in the ring. And if you have all the scenarios in your mind before you get in it, then you can more quickly adopt and change to the changing environment to best react to that that stimulus of whatever happened.
Now, you brought up while paragliding you can catch thermals. Can you explain what a thermal is and what that does while you're flying?
So whenever you look up into the sky and you see just empty air or clouds floating and birds flying, there are a bunch of things that are going on up there that are all invisible. So think of the air like a river that you can't see. It's constantly moving in different ways with different currents and different patterns that are very similar to a river. It's just invisible. So what happens with thermals is that when the sun comes out, especially when the sun is midday, and that sun is baking the earth and the ground below it, if there are particular areas on the earth that are darker than others, they'll get hotter from the sun. And when they get hotter, it heats up the surrounding air around it. And when air gets hotter than the surrounding air, it rises. Hot air rises. That's how hot air balloons work. So as that air rises, it creates a column of rising air that's hotter than the rest of the air around it. And think of, it actually looks similar to like a drop of honey that might be falling off a fingertip. So if you turn the world upside down and you think of honey falling off of a board in these little columns, that's exactly what thermals are, but flipped upside down going upwards. So whenever you see a hawk that's circling around, not actually flapping their wings, but they're going up in elevation, it's because they found a thermal and they're circling because thermals are columns. So you have to stay in that column and they keep circling, they keep going up and up and up because they don't want to expend more energy than they have to. They find a thermal, they ride it up to the top and then they glide back down. It's exactly what we can do in paragliding. with a wing that weight to ratio is very similar to a hawk, where you find that thermal, you circle in the thermal, you go up as high as you can go, and then you fly to the next one, you find that, and you keep going up, and you could theoretically do that forever until you run out of thermals.
It's incredible.
It's amazing.
So you say find a thermal, like, whatever, easy. Like, how do you?
Right, it's a bit hard to find something that's invisible.
Right. So how do you seek those out? Is it just experience, or is
well, just to preface, I am very much paragliding novice. Just started this several months ago. Thanks. I've read some books, listened to some podcasts, just like that. But yeah, it's the newest sport that I've really fallen in love with. That I've been spending as much time as I can training to get what's called a P1, P2 certification. That means you can fly by yourself without an instructor. Cool. So you need about 35 flights, and a couple other things involved, but I'm about halfway through that, so I just want to preface saying whatever I say right now, it's probably not the best paragliding advice, but it's whatever I know right now. So the way you find these invisible thermals is through a couple different factors that can tell you that something is there. So for instance, when you see a bird circling and going up, that's the best way. Birds are better at finding thermals than anyone else, because that's their environment. They live there all the time. So when you see that, that's definitely a sign. But also there's a lot of kind of cloud type patterns that you can use to see that as well. So in a really pretty blue sky summer day and you see those cotton ball clouds, those are all the tops of thermals. And that's what creates those clouds, is that you have a column of hot air that's rising and it gets to a certain altitude to the point where it cools off, that water vapor cools, and it forms a little cotton ball cloud. So whenever you see that cloud, under it could be a thermal. But I say could be because clouds drift. So it might be the top of a thermal that was actually over there, but now it's over here, and the thermal's no longer under it. But if there's not a lot of wind and those clouds are staying pretty steady, good chances there's a pretty strong thermal under that cloud. So you can use that. You can also look at the ground below you and you can see, okay, well, that's a parking lot, that's a road, that's a lake. Those things reflect heat a little bit better and probably would create a thermal. So when you get over that, if you feel like you're going to be kind of being pulled up a little bit, then you found it. So a couple of different ways that you can find it.
Okay, so bird watching, cloud gazing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, when you say it that way, it's pretty nice.
Oh yeah, exactly. So super interesting stuff. And is paragliding something that you can do with Vestigo today, or something in the future that you?
No, unfortunately, paragliding is just one of those kinds of sports. It's like, I don't know what a comparable thing would be, but you have to go through multiple week program just to be able to do it by yourself. You could do tandem paragliding, but it's only one person at a time. Right, exactly. So we like things that a whole group can do together, that you can do in your very first time. So something like paragliding, the gear is pretty expensive. One wing is between $3,000 and $5,000, so it's a bit more expensive than a climbing harness. So it's a little bit harder to use paragliding, but just a little bit, unfortunately. But there are a lot of other things we can do.
Cool. Well, so if people want to find out more about Vestigo, find out more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, well, this podcast is definitely the best way, for sure. But you can also go to Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, check out Vestigo. We've got a bio on there. Anyone who is interested in learning more about the outdoor space is always welcome to reach out to me, and would love to help in any way I can.
How can they do that on Instagram, Twitter? What are your
Instagram's
handles?
the best way.
Okay.
Yep.
What's your handle?
So it's at Marshall Mosher. So Marshall with 2 L's and then Mosher.
Awesome. And any final words? Anything else you wanna share before we call it?
I would just give a voice of encouragement to anyone who's considering doing something that gets them outside of their comfort zone but hasn't yet. Maybe that's why they listen to this podcast. Maybe it's something that's been in the back of their mind. All it takes is 10 seconds of insane courage to get outside your comfort zone and do something new. And the reason why Matt's laughing is because that's actually the title of one of our friend's books that he just came out with, which is an awesome book, which everyone should go read. Garrett Graverson, 10 Seconds of Insane Courage, which totally links in this mindset. But that's exactly what I would do, is take that small bit of exciting courage from all the stories you've heard from everyone that's been on this podcast and anyone that's done something you really admire. Use that to take that first step. And once you take the first step, the rest is easy from there. It's the first step that if you can overcome that, the rest follows in place.
So what I'm hearing is go rappelling with Vestigo.
Exactly.
Sign up for Brawl for a Cause.
Yep.
Change the world.
Buy Garrett's book.
Yeah, buy Garrett's book. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Marshall, thank you so much for coming on. Great friend. You've been a great guest. Looking forward to a lot more adventures with you.
Thanks. Yeah, same with me. We'll do some more night rappelling soon.
Cool.